Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a weekly podcast focusing on e-commerce topics featuring interviews with prominent people in the e-commerce space.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations by Practical E-Commerce. I'm Kerry Murdock. Comparison shopping engines can drive traffic to an e-commerce site. But there are over 120 such engines, and how to decide which of them to use and whether to use them at all is our topic today. We are joined by an expert in comparison shopping engines and an innovator and pioneer in e-commerce generally. He's Scot Wingo, CEO of ChannelAdvisor, a leading e-commerce software and services provider. Well, Scot, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks for hosting this interview.
Scot, you're an expert on, among other things, on comparison shopping engines. Our audience, as you know, is mainly smaller e-commerce merchants. And tell us about, for purposes of our audience, tell us about comparison shopping engines. How many of them are there? How much do they cost? And how should smaller merchants be looking at comparison shopping engines as we roll into the holiday season here?
Sure. Comparison shopping engines have been around since kind of the late 90s. So once there was enough e-commerce out there, then some entrepreneurs had the brilliant idea of having a search engine for those e-commerce sites, essentially, and thus comparison shopping engines were born. When we look at really the broad view of e-commerce, we have data that suggests that if you think about the different channels, we call them, where e-commerce takes place, search is the largest at about 40%, marketplaces is about 25%, and comparison shopping engines drive about 15% of e-commerce. So they're not the most important channel, but they're definitely top three for most retailers. As we look at comparison shopping engines, there's a lot of them out there. So we know, for example, our software supports about 120 comparison shopping engines. In the U.S., most people kind of think about the big seven, which are things such as Google's comparison shopping engine called Google Shopping. Then there's Shopping.com, Shopzilla, PriceGrabber, which now also powers Yahoo Shopping, NextTag, The Find, etc. They tend to be horizontal in nature, meaning you can find almost any product. But we're also seeing an explosion of vertical comparison shopping engines. So, for example, in the jewelry and apparel categories, it's very popular for there to be comparison shopping engines that are really specialized in those areas.
So a small merchant listening to this is wearing several hats. And one question that we have for you is, how do they know which of the comparison shopping engines to get on? And are they better off focusing their resources on something like you mentioned SEO at 40%, something like SEO or paid search, given all the complexities involved with comparison shopping engines?
Yeah, it is an interesting kind of question of when do you, as a merchant, when do you look at comparison shopping engines? And what we found is, for smaller merchants, a lot of times we found that they have a lot of success on marketplaces, and then paid search or AdWords is pretty complicated because it's pretty time intensive because you have to come up with the keywords. So we found a lot of them use comparison shopping engine as kind of that second broad category of channel that they work with. A lot of that's driven by some of the free engines that are out there. There's this general misperception about comparison shopping engines that they're very risky and expensive. And certainly kind of some of the older ones had a cost per click model, and that is something you need to keep an eye on. But what we typically recommend for smaller merchants is they take advantage of some of the free offerings out there. the largest of which is Google Product Search, also known as Google Shopping. Whenever you do a search at Google, you'll see quite a lot of different components on the page. So it's called the one box page. So you have obviously the paid and natural results. Frequently now you're seeing YouTube there, but then you also see Google Shopping results integrated there. And then there's a hybridization happening where Google has a whole bunch of offerings where they're marrying that comparison shopping engine experience of Google Shopping with the paid ad experience of AdWords, and you're seeing things like product listing ads, product extensions, all kinds of interesting collisions like that make this a really important area for small merchants. The other two that are very interesting is Bing has actually gone to an all-free model here in the last 30 days in preparation for holiday 2010. So that's one that we're trying to educate merchants that is now very much like Google Product Search. And Bing now powers Yahoo Shopping, so there's additional ways to get traffic there. And the third one is kind of an up-and-comer. It's called Defined, all one word, THEFIND.com. They've done a very good job of kind of working up the ranks of comparison shopping engines to be a top 5 engine, and they're also free. So there you have 3 of the top 10 are free, and definitely something that you should look at. Now, you mentioned SEO. Some people look at this and say, well, should I put time in SEO or in comparison shopping engines? And my answer is usually yes, do both. And they actually, in our world of e-commerce, these things always are never isolated, where you kind of say, if I do something on a comparison shopping engine, it won't impact SEO. Comparison shopping engines help your SEO from a number of reasons. Number one, they're inbound links, and lots of them. And they typically have very high page ranks because they have lots of content. So a comparison shopping engine can actually be a beneficiary for your SEO strategy. Additionally, if you think about SEO, let's say you have a certain product. I'll just pick out like an LCD monitor or an LCD TV as an example. It could be any product. And let's say you've done a lot of work and you're on the front page of SEO. Well, unless you do some really kind of unsavory things, you're most likely not going to be on that page 4 times. What comparison shopping engines allow you to do is be on that page 4 times, and it's kind of like a shelf space strategy. So what if for that search for an LCD TV, you were in Google Products Shopping, so you're right there at the top from that. You have your SEO efforts, and you're on the front page. Let's say Defined and another engine that you pay for, maybe Nextag, they all rank very highly for that product. Well, now you essentially have 4 or 5 different paths to that offer that you have through those different SEO campaigns. So one way to think about it is you can piggyback on all the work from an SEO perspective that the comparison shopping engines do. Then what we usually find is after the free programs, then that gives you a lot of data to go figure out if the paid programs will work. So you can go see, for example, how much traffic is Google product search sending to your items, what are your top sellers, and those are probably really good candidates for a paid program. So then you can go to a shopping.com, Shopzilla, Nextag, PriceGrabber, and start to implement a paid program with a lot of data behind it so that you're not flying blind. And then you can manage those programs and achieve whatever ROI metrics that you're after.
You mentioned Bing. Is that Bing Shopping?
Yes.
Interesting. Tell us about some of the back-end issues that merchants need to be aware of, if any. So you mentioned the 3 that you just mentioned there, Google Shopping, Bing, and the Find, I believe were the 3 you just mentioned, were good places to start and that they're free. Are there back-end administrative issues that merchants need to be thinking about when they start listing their products on those sites?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's kind of an interesting kind of a mix of technologies. Most of these engines are very technologically savvy on the front end, meaning they've got really good search engines and crisp UIs and lots of interesting things there. But on the back end, they're actually pretty primitive, and that can be a big hurdle for a small merchant. And by primitive, what I mean is they each have their own file format. So and usually they deal in CSVs. They get advanced and do XML, but for most folks listening to this podcast, they're going to be dealing with this, the comma-separated file. So what becomes very cumbersome is you don't want to be spending all day in Excel essentially generating CSVs for these engines. And even if you do the 3 free ones, that's 3 different formats. There's 3 different ways you deliver them. And everyone has pretty dynamic products these days, so you're going to want to, if you update a product description or you add a new product or price changes or whatnot, you need to keep these data feeds pretty up to date. So that can be kind of a maintenance nightmare. And another kind of trick of the industry is all of these engines have what are called minimum requirements, which are data elements such as short description, long description, an image URL, a price, and maybe a quantity, and those kinds of things. Well, that's the minimum. And unfortunately, in today's world, the minimum is never enough. So there's a bunch of recommended fields like attributes. So for a pair of jeans, for example, many engines may want up to 15 attributes. So, what kind of wash does it have? What kind of hem? Is it bootleg or straight leg? All these different kinds of things that they use on the front end to enhance the buyer experience. And if you provide the minimum, your products aren't going to get seen. So it just kind of makes that data management issue that much larger for a lot of merchants.
What happens under this scenario if I'm out of a product, if I'm a smaller merchant and I run out of a product, but it's still on these engines? So the engines, my feed is not current enough, and the engines show that I have a product. You mentioned the example of jeans, I think is what you just said. And someone clicks on it and they go to my site and I'm actually out of those. What are the ramifications to that?
Yeah, we always kind of call that kind of the worst click you can get, because you have no chance of getting ROI on that click unless the shopper kind of wanted to buy jeans and ended up buying a treadmill or something, which it does happen. You see cases of that, but they're pretty infrequent. So usually what we recommend is that if you're out of stock of items, it's a bad consumer experience to publish out there to the world that you have the item. Another one is, we see it all the time where you may have raised a price on something and the consumer looks out there and they see $99 and they click through and it's $119. There's no worse feeling and way to really aggravate a consumer than by not having great data out there.
Scott, we hear from folks that counsel smaller merchants to find a niche and to not compete on price. That is, a smaller merchant is not going to beat a large retailer on commodity type goods for price. A strategy of using comparison shopping engines seems to run counter to that, seems to be inviting a merchant to compete on price when consumers are comparing their products. Is that true?
To some extent, price does factor into it, and what happens is most of the comparison shopping engines don't default to a low price search. Part of the reason is that it's very hard for them to know exactly what you're looking for, and when you sort by the low price, that's when you really see a lot of things that aren't what you're looking for. So, for example, you may go to an engine and type in iPod, and if you sorted by lowest price, what you're going to find is a bunch of iPod accessories that they have a hard time filtering out some of that stuff. So most of them implement more of a best match, trying to guess what you're looking for. And as part of that algorithm of the search results, merchant feedback is a huge part of that. There's also other things, and it's kind of broader. When we talk to small merchants, there's many ways they can differentiate themselves. Service is a huge one, and that's kind of ties into merchant ratings. So service is really important. Selection is another one where, within your niche, if you want to be, we have a customer that comes to mind that's like one of the top beading sites. They have every bead you could ever possibly imagine because they've decided that that's what they're going to do. They're going to own this beading category, and they're going to really focus on selection and service. Another element that small merchants have that large don't is what I would call content. So just kind of take this beading example even further. In addition to having all these beads, having the best descriptions, the best way to search through the beads, maybe the diameter of the beads is important to you, and a large merchant would never get around to, like Michaels, for example, Michaels.com. You would never get around to having a bead-specific search engine. Well, bead retailer could. And then also content. So maybe some original content around, how to get into beading, product reviews are really great original content that small merchants bring into the world that a lot of large merchants don't really have customers that will take time or the passion to do reviews like that. So if you think about that spectrum of ways to differentiate yourselves, comparison shopping engines really allow for all of that to flow right on through. So, selection, obviously, if you're If you're the only guy providing Shopzilla with, a really nice database of beads, you're going to get a lot of extra sales from that. If your service is stellar and maybe your price is a little bit higher, but people do, in today's day and age, they do care about service. And if you have more stars or smiley faces or whatever the comparison shopping engine uses, that's going to be beneficial to you. And then the same is with content, where that content really shines through if you can get it in your data feed and get it to the engines. Someone may land on a page and see 6 different products described, and yours may be 2 paragraphs and everyone else's is a short sentence. Well, that's going to make people feel like you're more of an expert around that, and they may need advice and help with whatever they're buying, and they're going to tend to lean towards you versus the lower offering.
Speaking of price, shifting gears just for a sec, how do comparison shopping engines, what is their pricing model? You mentioned the 3 or 4 earlier that are all free. So how do those comparison engines make money?
They make money off of other parts of their site. So Google obviously is trying to wrap a really great content to help consumers with ads. So they make their money off of the paid search program or text links. The Find is the same way, and so is Bing. So those are 3 that are unique in the top 10 and they're free. The rest, their business model is a cost per click business model, just like paid search. So it's typically done on a rate card versus an auction. So in paid search, you auction or bid using the CPC as the bid amount. In comparison shopping engines, there's usually a rate card. And that rate card will say something like, okay, on shopping.com in the electronics category, you're going to pay 40 cents. And in apparel, you're going to pay 29. And over here, you'll pay 18 and so on. So what you do is you pay on a cost per click basis. And then it's up to the merchant to figure out, for their basket of goods, what they're willing to pay the engine. And what a lot of our customers do is they kind of boil it down to a percentage, or sometimes they'll look at a return on ad spend if they're more in the advertising world. Or what we found a lot of smaller merchants do is they look at it from we call it an effective take rate or an effective revenue share. So what percentage of your sales went towards comparison shopping engines? Most of our customers manage to kind of somewhere between 10 and 20%. And the way it works is, but let's say you send 1,000 products to shopping.com. And what you can start to pretty quickly do is, as you track this, you can start to say, well, for 800 products, yes, I'm achieving my 10% or better. But maybe for 200 products, you're not. What you can do is you can actually stop advertising those products. You don't have to advertise all your products. It's up to you, the retailer, to decide which products are a good fit for the engines. So then you say, all right, 800 of my 1,000 are working great, 200 aren't. I'm going to take those out of the data feed because I'm losing money on those. I'm not achieving my financial goals. So that's how most merchants manage these engines. Now, some of the engines actually allow you to bid. So you could say 800 of my products are doing really well. Maybe 100 of the products are doing well. I'm willing to pay a little bit more on. Maybe I'm at 5% revenue share, and I'd be willing to pay a little bit more, or maybe I'll lower my price or something like that. And then for the 200 that aren't doing well, you can actually lower your bid and say, okay, next tag, your price for electronics is 40 cents. I only make money on this item at 20 cents, so that's what I'm going to bid. And then the engines do things on their side to either promote or demote your items based on what's going on with the bidding on a CPC basis.
Changing gears again, Scott, your company, ChannelAdvisor, is a leading e-commerce software and services provider. Tell our audience a little bit about your company.
ChannelAdvisor is a 9-year-old software company, and what we do is we provide retailers software. It's called software as a service or on demand, maybe you've heard of, where you don't have to install any servers or anything like that. You just access our software through a browser. So it's a very low cost to get started, and there's no IT staff needed. So it's an ideal solution for small and large businesses. And what our software does is, in the field of comparison shopping engines, all those manual things I was talking about, our software takes care of that. So at one level, we're going to take your inventory and generate those data feeds for whatever engines you want us to. That's really only part of it, the feed kind of generation and translation part. Then on top of that, we're going to add analytics so that you see which of your products are doing well, which are hitting their financial goals, and which are not. And then on top of that, we add something called channel optimization, where we'll actually go and on your behalf, we can delete products from the feed if they're not hitting your goals, or we can do the bidding if the engine allows such a thing. We can bid the CPC down for the retailer. So what it allows you to do is maybe on your own you could manage one or two of these free programs. But if you use our software, then adding other engines essentially becomes a checkbox where you say, okay, I've gotten shopping.com really working for me. Now I'd like to add Shopzilla, BizRate, and PriceGrabber, and three others. Then our software essentially allows you to do that in, literally under an hour kind of a time, versus doing it yourself would be a huge undertaking. So that's what we do. We really help retailers save time and effort and effectively sell more through these channels. In addition to comparison shopping, we also support marketplaces such as eBay, Amazon, Buy.com. And then we have quite a bit that we do in the world of paid search. And then a lot of our customers that have come to us from eBay that don't have web stores, they use us for a web store as well. We have a premium web store. And then last but not least, we also have a rich media offering where if you want to have a apparel site or something like that you want to have advanced zooming and panning and color changing, we have a product line for that as well.
Okay. We've got just a minute or two here. Anything else on your mind today for our listeners who are, as you know, smaller e-commerce merchants?
We do have an area that we call the Strategy and Support Center, ssc.channeladvisor.com, and we have tons of content out there. A lot of it's targeted towards our customers, but we open it up for everybody. So if listeners want to learn more about comparison shopping engines, we have that as a resource. We also operate a blog called CSE Strategies, and that's where we kind of keep everyone up to date on any news items and exciting events in the world of comparison shopping. And then last but not least, we'd love for people to consider our software. The suite is called ChannelAdvisor Complete, and it helps retailers with search, comparison, shopping engines, marketplaces, web stores, and rich media.
Well, for purposes of our listeners, we've been visiting with Scot Wingo. Scot is the CEO of ChannelAdvisor. Both Scot and ChannelAdvisor are innovators in the e-commerce world. And that website, ChannelAdvisor's website, is ChannelAdvisor.com. That's ChannelAdvisor.com. And Scot Wingo, the CEO of ChannelAdvisor, we want to thank you for your time today, sir.
Good day, Kerry.
That's all the time we have for this week's e-commerce conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Please tune in next week for another new episode.